So, welcome everybody to today's webinar about more effective cross-browser testing. Before we start, after the presentation is complete, you will get an email with a recording and, of course, the slides. So you don't need to try to write down all the links I will show you. You will get all this in a separate email afterwards. So, to start, what will we talk about today? We'll take a quick look at, if you're talking about cross-browser testing, what do you really test and what do you really need to test? We will cover how do the testing during development of websites, web applications. I will show you a nice method to speed up regression testing. So if you need to run through manual testing scripts on a regular basis to do regression testing for web applications or websites, this will be a very handy tool. And last but not least, I will talk about validating layout changes. So most of you may know or have been there that the client wants to change the layout of a page after the fact, and you don't necessarily change the functionality again, but you change a font or you change a button color to green or something like that, and you need a quick way to validate the layout in the different browsers to make sure that you didn't break any important part of the website. If anybody has any questions now or at the end, in your GoToWebinar UI, you should be able to enter these questions. So even if you don't have a microphone, you will be able to ask questions, and I will answer them all at the end. Okay, so let's jump right in with the question on what do you really need to test. Before, in an ideal world, you would define your target browsers even before you write the first line of code, and before you do any design with the customer, because it's much easier to develop for a browser than to extend the website to support a browser after the fact. So if a website is already completed, it's much harder to get it working, let's say for example in an older Internet Explorer version, than it would have been to design the page from the start to support this particular browser version. That said, there are a few browsers that only run on a specific operating system, like for example Internet Explorer only runs on Microsoft Windows, so there's no question on which operating system you will test for this browser. But browsers like Chrome or Firefox can be run on Windows, on Mac OS, and on Linux, for example. So the natural thing to do would be to test these browsers on every of the available operating systems. But in most cases, this is not strictly necessary because they still render web pages the same on the different operating systems, as long as you don't go for pixel perfect, because there can be slight differences, for example, in font rendering. But for general functionality, you will be fine if you just test on one operating system. Another topic in this regard of browser testing are the mobile browsers. So mostly every website you generate today or you develop today will need some sort of support for mobile devices. So a lot of users normally will be on mobile devices, and while it might be possible to test for all different desktop browsers, as you've seen in the slide before, there are, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7. It's practically impossible to test for all mobile devices because there is an endless supply of iOS devices. The iPhone, the iPad have multiple versions. There are countless Android devices out there, and there are more things like Windows Phone, for example, if you want to count them. So it's really not feasible to test for every of these mobile devices. So what we can do instead is we can test for responsiveness, which means that a responsive website resizes its element in its layout based on the available screen space. So, for example, a desktop website will take up all the screen space and show the navigation one to another, one on the right to another, for example. While on a mobile phone it would display the navigation one below each other, always to see and use the available screen space. To test and develop responsive websites, there are 4 very basic things you can do. For one, I always define a minimal width and height, which I will use to test the website. This is just because if you don't do that, the customer will open the website on the browser that comes with his fridge, and it will have 100 pixels in width and 100 pixels in height, and your website will most likely not look very good on this one. So it's best to define a minimum width and height with what you can test and what you can accomplish. For testing, it's always a good idea to select a few different devices, a few in maybe 3 or 4, not a few in 25. So for example, you could say we will test for an Android device, we will test for an iPhone, and we will test for an iPad. And maybe if you have the time, you can add an Android tablet as well. But with a correctly created responsive website, it will not matter which real device you're using. And for this responsiveness to work, it's important to test this during development. Taking an already existing website and making it responsive after the fact is again much more complicated than creating a responsive website from the start. So test this during development and make sure that all new features or all new subpages you create are responsive from the start. And last but not least, a great way to make this responsiveness default is to use a framework like, for example, Bootstrap, which already contains all the logic you can use to make your website responsive. Again, as I've said before, you will later get the slides, and there is a link for the Bootstrap framework, for example, included. I've already said it twice before. The testing during development is very important. Testing after the website is completed takes much longer and is a lot harder than testing during development. I always suggest to select a standards compliant browser during development, which you can then use for development. So popular choices would be Google Chrome, for example, or Mozilla Firefox, or Safari, because they have a quite good standards compliance and they have great developer tools. So during development, test with one of these browsers so that you are then sure that your feature is standards compliant. It's generally not a great idea to start your testing or your development with Internet Explorer, for example, which does not support all features. And after it's working in Internet Explorer, you then have to recreate part of the page because what works in Internet Explorer might not be standards compliant. After you've completed the feature and it works in most likely that in all standards compliant browsers, you could then go ahead and test with all the other browsers, test for responsiveness, and of course fix any bugs you might encounter. Let's get to the real testing part here. For testing during development, you will need the browser somewhere. You can most browsers you can install on your machine, so you can install Firefox, you can install Chrome, you can install Opera, and you can test with the latest version of this browser on your local machine, which is really convenient. For other browsers like, let's say for example, Internet Explorer, it's already more complicated because you may not be able to run Internet Explorer on your local machine. Either because you're running macOS or because you have Windows 10, for example, which comes with EE11, and you cannot run Internet Explorer 8 on Windows 10. It's just not directly possible. For this, to solve this problem, Microsoft has provided us with, not us specially, but everyone who is interested with virtual machines that can be used for testing with Internet Explorer and Microsoft Edge. And these virtual machines, we'll see in a minute, are available on modern.ie and can be downloaded and used on any operating system. The hardest browser to test during development is most likely Safari, because it will only run on macOS, and if you don't have macOS, you're not allowed to run virtual machines of macOS if you're not using Apple hardware. So for Safari testing, you will need some kind of tool, either online or offline, to help with the testing. As I've said before, in most cases it's not necessary to test the same browser on different operating systems. So I'll show it. The free virtual machines Microsoft provides. So as I've said before, you get the link later on. You can download them on the Microsoft homepage. They're here, IE8, IE11 on different operating systems even, and the latest version of Microsoft Edge is available as well. So you can just select the browser you need to test, and you can select the platform you're using, the virtualization platform in this case. So for example, VirtualBox, the first one here, is available on Linux, Windows, and Mac OS, and is free of charge. So you can use that for testing. After that, you simply download the file, which can take a while. It's roughly 4 GB of data. And then you can use the virtual machines for your browser testing on your local machine. Again, you can repeat that for every browser you need to test. These virtual machines are licensed, and I think they will expire after 90 days. After that, you can renew them or download new ones just as you need it. As I've said, the other browsers you can simply download and install on your local machine. Okay, so as you surely know, we have a cross-browser testing tool, and this here now should not be a sales demo or something like that, but I want to quickly tell you what our tool does in contrast to the manual process I showed you before. So our tool BrowseEmAll has one of the advantages is that it can run more than one version of the different browsers. So if you install Google Chrome on your machine, you will always have the latest version because it auto-updates every time you open it. With BrowseEmAll, you can run more older versions of the browser as well if necessary. This holds true for Chrome, Firefox, and Opera. And the browsers are not really installed on your machine, so you don't find them in your start menu, for example. And your system is not cluttered with 100 different browsers and their versions. Our tool will use the same virtual machines provided by Microsoft, but they will be automatically downloaded, installed, updated, renewed, etc. So you don't have to think about using them. They're just there for you to start and stop. And lastly, we have created a custom build of Safari for Windows. So with our tool, you will be able to test websites for the rendering engine behind Safari, which is WebKit, but we have packed into another UI, which means it looks different than the real Safari. But the website rendering will be the same. Okay, I will not run through the features in the tool. You can check this out yourself if you need to. My next point on the list is faster regression testing. So most likely you have done this once or twice before. You have a manual script or a feature list you have to run to before every release to see if everything still works in all browsers. And this is mostly a manual process, so there is someone sitting at the computer, opening the browser, running through all the features, testing them, opening the next browser, and so on, and so on, and so on, which is not that fascinating of work. Luckily, there's a nice tool available which is called BrowseSync, which can help you do this much more efficiently. It will simply open more than one browser at the time and synchronize your user interactions across to the different browsers. So, for example, you can open Firefox and Chrome side by side and do your test in Firefox, and all the actions you take in Firefox will automatically be synchronized across to Google Chrome. This works on your local machine, so you can use it for localhost, for local files, or for a staging environment. If my description will most likely not do it justice, so I will show it real quick. Here we will start up the BrowseSync. Let's take a look at the command line, which we will here be testing BrowseEmAll.com with Firefox and Internet Explorer. And as you can see, the tool has opened Firefox and Internet Explorer here. Firefox on the left, Internet Explorer on the right. And now, if I take any action in one of these windows, it will automatically be synchronized to the other one. So if I on the right I click here on documentation, for example, the left browser will follow my lead here. This makes regression testing much easier because depending on how big your screen is, you can run 4 browsers side by side, for example, and test in maybe half the time than you would need if you would need to repeat all the steps in all browsers separately. Again, in the slides you will get later, there's a link for browser sync and how you can use it in details. Again, really quick, BrowseEmAll has a similar feature which is also based on browser sync, but it will take it one step further. It will actually manage browser sync for you, so if they update things or if they release new versions, you will get them as well. And it will enable browser sync inside the virtual machines by Microsoft. So, for example, with BrowseEmAll you could run all 4 different versions of Internet Explorer side by side, all of which would be running in a virtual machine because they cannot run on your local machine directly. And all your input to one of these browsers would be synchronized to the other virtual machines as well, which can be really handy for regression testing, especially if you need to test Internet Explorer or Microsoft Edge as well. And with BrowseEmAll, it will also work behind your possible corporate proxy. So if you need to test a staging environment, for example, which is only reachable through the proxy server, you can do this with BrowseEmAll as well, but it's not supported by browser sync out of the box. Again, I will not show it to you because you can try it out yourself, and it doesn't look that different from what I showed you before. Last but not least, more often than not, you will need to validate changes you made in the layout of any website to make sure that these changes work in every supported browser. Now you could of course do this by hand, by opening the website in every browser, navigating to the real page, validating the change, closing the browser, open the next one, and so on and so on and so on. Like the manual regression testing, this really is not that much fun, and it takes a lot of time, especially if you have to run to 20 browsers, for example. So there are a few different tools which you can use. Also, they are not all open source, to create screenshots. There is Browser Stack, for example, which is a paid service that can provide you with screenshots of any URL that's available online. Microsoft provides a similar feature which generates screenshots for you for any website that's publicly available. And last but not least, the free and open source variant is Browser Shots, which can also take screenshots with most browsers, as long as the website is available publicly. So this will not work for staging environments, for example. Let's take a quick look at the Microsoft variant here. As I've said before, you get the links later on. And we will take now some screenshots from our homepage, browseemall.com. Here at Microsoft, you cannot select which browsers you would like to test, so they pre-select them for you. Browsers include Edge, Internet Explorer, Chrome, Firefox, Safari, but not the latest versions. So for example, we see here Chrome 50. I think Chrome is at 54 currently, and Firefox is at 49. On the other hand, this is free. And of course, you can see the screenshots in large details as well. And they will even include some mobile devices like the iPad or the iPhone. So with this, you will only need to validate the layout changes in the screenshots, which can be much faster than through manual testing. Once again, the main advantage our tool has, BrowseEmAll, is that it can work on staging environments and localhost because it runs on your local machine. You can select different resolutions with it. It's only possible with BrowserStack, the paid service. And last but not least, the screenshots are taken in the virtual machines provided by Microsoft, which means they are reliable and taken in the real browser. So before we go over to the Q&A, you can already think about your questions. Let me tell you, you can get a free trial of our tool, either from our homepage or by emailing the support team. And if you're interested, we also do custom product demos. And if you have any questions now, you have a questions button in your GoToWebinar UI where you can type in your questions. Thank you very much. So does anybody have any questions? Or should I show something in more details? Just let me know. Are there any more questions? So if there are no more questions, I would like to thank you all for attending today's webinar. On the other hand, if you have anything that will come up in the future, feel free to email me or our support team at support@browseemall.com. And I hope some of you will join us at one of our next webinars. Thank you very much.